Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for joining me. This is kind of an impromptu video, so sorry if it seems sloppy or rushed. I kind of had the idea and just thought I'd go ahead and make it real quick while I had a second. As you know from the title, this video is about books for doing philosophy. One question you may have a lot, especially if you're engaged in like the online philosophy community, or you've watched some YouTube discussions on philosophy, or tried to read a little bit, maybe you're not understanding it, or maybe you just want to understand it more, or you see people engage in arguments, you want to engage with that more. A common question I had getting into the field, and a question I still have as I'm trying to learn more, is like what to do to get good at philosophy, right? Like how do you understand all the concepts and distinctions and fallacies philosophers use? How do you know all these kind of abstractions they talk about when they make arguments and references, like what are these terms and everything? So there's kind of this, you'll see like complicated posts maybe, and it's like, well, how do I even begin to understand this? So I made this video to share a couple books and resources. Well, there's a lot of online resources, but mostly just books that I've personally found helpful in terms of understanding philosophy and getting better at philosophy. So if you're looking for a place to start, some of these should be pretty good, going over sort of the big debates in the field, and then kind of getting better at your personal critical thinking and observation and evaluation of philosophy and all that. So that's why I made this video, so hopefully you enjoy it and the recommendations are helpful. Yeah, let's get right into it. So this is what you guys don't see in my other videos, is the behind shot of the desk here. I normally am facing this way so you can see all my cool decorations. At some point we can do a bookshelf tour maybe. I've got lots up here and all around me. But for today I think there's like 16 books right here I've got picked out. So this stack we're going to go through first. This is sort of just familiarizing yourself with philosophy more generally. So to start with, of course, you got to read Plato, the Platonic Dialogues, Greek philosophy. Ideally, you're going to eventually want to read Aristotle, of course, but just the Platonic Dialogues are good to read because arguments from them are still being talked about, and a lot of issues in contemporary philosophy and metaphysics are still, very relevant information discussed in the dialogues. So definitely read those. You can this copy of most of Plato's dialogues I got for like $7 at Barnes & Noble. Very accessible, easy to find. And good, definitely crucial to read. This one, not particular, this book actually, it's just the one I chose as an example, the Oxford Very Short Introduction series. I actually have one that's just about philosophy, and then there's all kinds of subtopics within philosophy, like this metaphysics book, for example, and they're all really good because they're short, but they're still rigorous. They're written by professional scholars, so they're always interesting and really good information, really well written, so you get kind of good information. I'm going to put these here. And these are in no particular order of recommendation, by the way. Next is The Pig That Wants to Be Eaten, 100 Experiments for the Armchair Philosopher by Julian Baggini. It's kind of just a book about thought experiments, a lot of them in ethics, so it's really good just to kind of get an overview of sort of what philosophers talk about in the field and thought experiments they use, and kind of get your creative juices flowing in terms of how to think about thought experiments. And then this is actually like a visual guide Stephen Law wrote, just titled Philosophy. It's got the history, ideas, kind of some critical thinking and just philosophical thinking tips and all that. Lots of just some general history and everything. So it's a good resource generally to, build up the philosophy reservoir. And then kind of just getting into some of the questions of philosophy. This is kind of a really good book by Jim Holt. It's pretty easy to read. It's just about kind of some of the contemporary theories and proposed explanations about why anything exists at all. So it kind of goes over some of the contemporary world. My only complaint with it is it goes a lot more over science than philosophy, probably. But the parts where it does discuss philosophy, it's rather well done, and it's definitely a fun read and pretty easy. I'll do this one first because the last one I really like. This is just a little book I've not done too much with yet. It's The Philosopher's Notebook. So you can find this at bookstores. Goes over some general, a lot of the big philosophers in history, and then sort of asks you questions about how to maybe answer some of the questions they've posed and write out your own answers. So there's some like philosophy journaling, gives you some prompts. So it's good, just kind of start practice thinking philosophically, if you will. And then this is actually the book that kind of made me fall in love with philosophy. So it holds a special place for me, Sophie's World. It's just a novel, really, but built into the novel is kind of the history of Western philosophy. So the very beginning of the book is breathtaking, and when it talks about philosophy, it's kind of what made me love it. So that book comes highly recommended. It's pretty easy read, pretty fun, light reading but good to get an introduction. So the next stack of books here is going to be the meat of it. These are the books for actually, like, doing philosophy. These are, like, kind of get introduced to the field. There's obviously a lot more to read in terms of the history, especially of Western analytic philosophy. But these are the books that you want to take a look at for, like, actually doing philosophy, learning the concepts and all that. There's a couple in here that I think are more so opinionated. So I'll point those out when you see them, which they'll be pretty obvious. So the first is just the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy. There's an app for this, actually, an app version that's $10. The paperback I have here is only like $10 or $15 on Amazon, so it's definitely worth a buy. It's really comprehensive. A couple of definitions aren't perfect, like its philosophy of religion definitions, but generally it's got a lot of great stuff, so any concepts you just want to learn about a little bit, it's good. And I've used this a lot in reference for videos. You'll probably recall if you've seen any of my previous stuff. It's a great resource to have. This one I've actually not read much of, so take my recommendation with a grain of salt. But I found this one at a bookstore, and it's not written by a professional philosopher, but I've skimmed through it a little bit, and it's just sort of got some good tools and overviews on how to think philosophically, generally speaking. It goes over sort of like the tools philosophers have used, so sort of, Hume's fork, Nietzsche's hammer, and then some more of that. So just a good, and again, light reading, pretty accessible, not like super technical. It's just good for general philosophical thinking before you get super deep in. A little more advanced book, but that's really, really good for doing philosophy is this book, Doing Philosophy by Timothy Williamson. So it goes over kind of just how philosophy begins with sort of this common curiosity, talks a little bit about logic, but it actually lays out a really good and interesting philosophical methodology of comparing theories and using thought experiments and things like that. So this is an excellent book. It's a pretty quick read, but it's super well written. It's super good. It's one of the better recommendations if you're just looking for something on just doing philosophy. And it's like $11 for this hardcover on Amazon. So yeah, I might do more extensive review on some of these books. Let me know if you'd like that for any particular one. I'll probably do one for this one because I like Timothy Williamson from what I've seen, and this was an excellent book. Now this one is obviously more opinionated, but I found it really good. Ben Burgis's book, Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, is a really good introduction to propositional logic and general informal logic. A lot of a good compendium in here of fallacies and some good examples of how to use them so you get them down. So it's obviously opinionated for leftism. He gives some arguments for socialism in here. But if you're wanting to get into just kind of knowing some basic propositional logic and logical thinking, it's a really accessible and well done guide. So I definitely would highly recommend that one, also cheap. This one is actually written by a good friend of mine. Some of you will know him from previous videos on the channel, Majesty of Reason, who actually has his own YouTube channel now, also called Majesty of Reason, so definitely check that out. My good friend Joe Schmid, he's been on the channel many times, doing some interviews with me and with some other philosophers. He's helped co-host those, and this book is just excellent. I can't say enough good things about it. Kind of, he sets the stage for thinking well. Then this chapter on methods and toolkits is just amazing. Really good compendium, one of the best you'll find in the literature, actually. And then after that, he goes into, so about 80 pages in is where he talks about all the tools and everything, and then he gets into some case studies of scientism, laws of nature, philosophy of mind. So it'll get you up to date with some interesting contemporary debates in the field and also equip you with the tools necessary to go through them. So this one, again, can't recommend enough. It's a fantastic book. Definitely read it. This is one on the bottom here I've not, again, read a ton of, but it comes extremely highly recommended, and it's one of the better books on the market for this, so I've been told, again, from some of the reviews. Kind of goes through a lot of general stuff in philosophy, language, philosophy of time, philosophy of religion, talks about logic, conceptual distinctions, history, let's see what else here, yeah, knowledge. So it's a good, really good just overview to the whole field, kind of give you a good foundation for philosophy more broadly, get you up to date on some of the debates like freedom. Now, out of all the ones I'm going to recommend, this is absolutely the best book I've found on this. The only book that comes even close is Joe's book here. And if he had made his longer, I have no doubt he could have written one just about as good, if not better. But this is definitely the best book for just doing philosophy well, getting into it. It's got, as it says, it's a compendium of philosophical concepts and methods. This one is by Julian Baggini, and Fossil here. There's also a critical thinking toolkit and an ethics toolkit online. This is the only one I have a copy of right now, but this one is absolutely excellent. It's definitely the best at getting you up to date on some contemporary, just like conceptual distinctions, you know, necessity, contingency, analytic, synthetic, all that. So if you want to get good at philosophy in sort of the contemporary world and know the terminology, know how to think about it, know some logical fallacies, things like the is-ought gap and all the informal validity soundness. I mean, this is just a great comprehensive guide for doing philosophy. So this is, if you only get one book out of any of them, get this one. This is fantastic. But go ahead and pick up Joe's too. It's only $6. But yeah, this is your go-to for, you know, doing philosophy. The last three recommendations I have are opinionated ones, and they're actually more specific. They're all philosophy of religion related. So, and I recommend them because they're excellent books for philosophy of religion, but contained with them, they also have just really interesting concepts, updates, and things to say about doing philosophy in general. So let's start off with these two, which are kind of polar opposites in terms of opinion. I've recommended this book before on the channel, How Reason Can Lead to God by Josh Rasmussen. He sketches out a really interesting and novel argument for a necessary being and then these properties being divine. But the book is just really good in terms of developing critical thinking and brings up to date on some contemporary issues and concepts in metaphysics and explains them really, really well. So it's a great book in its own right, just as an argument, as a comprehensive argument, but it's actually a really good read in terms of just sharpening your philosophical skills. You may not be convinced of the conclusion, as I've said before. I wasn't necessarily. There are a couple moves he makes that, you know, you might have issue with, but that's why you read this one and then read this one. But yeah, no, this is just, again, can't recommend enough. Great book, great for just sharpening your skills. And then this book also is the one I'd read in tandem with it. Robin Lepoidovin's Arguing for Atheism. It's sort of an introduction to philosophy of religion, but each argument he discusses, he teaches you about some concepts in metaphysics. When he discusses the cosmological arguments, he teaches about different philosophy of time, different notions of causation, the distinction between necessity and contingency. So this book taught me a lot of what I know about the contemporary philosophy of religion debate because it explained it all so well. So that's probably your go-to for concepts in philosophy of religion. I'd read this one in tandem with Josh's because they both make really compelling arguments for either side. So you may just come out an agnostic, but you'll come out with more philosophical terminology under your belt. So go for it. And then this last one is one of my favorite books, probably my favorite book in philosophy of religion. Again, very short, like 100 pages long. It's actually pretty expensive, but if you can find a PDF or get it on sale like I did, it's great. The Best Argument Against God by Graham Oppy. And it's so great because of just the approach he takes, kind of the abductive argument. So it gets you some good practice in just kind of some real world practice in terms of how to lay out an argument, compare it to another argument, and kind of compare contrasting theories and evidence and arguments and go through those. So again, kind of like Josh's book, you may not be convinced of the argument he gives, but the critical thinking displayed along the way will be helpful regardless. So, all right, I think that was about 16 books or so. I'm going to upload this, but hopefully I can eventually add something in the description kind of listing them all. You should be able to find them all on Amazon, most of them relatively cheap. Yeah, they're all great. So if you're just kind of getting started in philosophy or want a refresher on some of the basics, these are some good places to get started, to get a survey of the field, the kind of questions it's asking and trying to answer, and as well as the concepts it uses. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully it was helpful. I'll hopefully be able to make some reviews and some more comprehensive guides to these books as time goes along. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again.